Dust swirled in the blistering summer air as a lone figure trudged down the dirt road leading into the town of Red Rock. Her dress was little more than tattered rags clinging to her frame, sun-faded and torn from weeks of wandering. Her hair hung in disarray, strands glued to her damp face, and her shoes were so worn that one heel was missing altogether. Yet, what stood out most was her eyes, haunted, desperate, and searching for mercy in a place where mercy was seldom given. She stumbled in front of the saloon, leaning against the porch railing for strength. Men on the porch looked at her with indifference, some with thinly veiled disgust, others with interest not meant for kindness. She ignored their stares and pushed her way toward the general store. Her hands trembled as she grasped the counter, and in a voice rough from thirst, she whispered, "Please, do you have work? Anything at all. I can sew, I can clean, I'll scrub floors till my fingers bleed." The storekeeper, a stout man with a bristly mustache, gave her one long look and snorted, "Lady, you look like you can barely stand. Ain't nobody gonna pay for broken bones and rags." The rejection cracked something inside her, and her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. She'd turned to leave, but a shadow blocked her path. She looked up, and froze. He stood taller than most men, broad-shouldered, his hat casting a sharp line across his weather-beaten face. His eyes were a piercing gray, the kind that didn't flinch when storms rolled over the plains. His boots were dusty but well-kept, his coat long and tailored in a way that whispered of wealth without flaunting it. Every man in town seemed to give way when he walked through, though he hadn't spoken a word yet. The woman's lips parted, but no sound came. The man studied her, his gaze heavy and unreadable, then finally said, his voice deep as a rumble, "You said you can work." She nodded quickly, "Yes, sir. Please, I'll do anything." The corner of his jaw tightened, and then he asked something so strange, so sudden, that her knees almost buckled. "Will you be the mother my girls need?" The world seemed to still. Conversations outside quieted, or perhaps it was only in her ears. She blinked at him, unable to believe she'd heard right. "Sir, what?" He didn't repeat himself. Instead, he reached into his coat, pulled out a coin, and flipped it onto the counter for the storekeeper. "Food, clothes, a clean dress, charge it to my account." Then he turned back to her. "Come with me." Shock rooted her in place, but hunger, exhaustion, and the strange steel in his voice pushed her forward. Hours later, she found herself riding in his wagon, clutching a bundle of new clothes and bread she'd devoured half of already. The ranch stretched out before them, acres of golden grass rolling beneath the sun, cattle grazing in the distance, and a great white house that stood like a fortress against the wild frontier. The man finally introduced himself. "Name's Colton Hayes." She lowered her eyes. "Clara," she whispered. When they arrived, two little girls came running from the porch, one about 8, the other 6. Their hair was the same shade as Colton's, sunlit brown, and their laughter rang like silver bells. But when they saw Clara, they slowed, their curiosity sharp as their father's eyes. Colton rested a hand on each of their shoulders. "Girls, this is Clara. She'll be staying with us." The younger one tilted her head. "Is she gonna be our new mama?" Clara's breath caught, but before she could speak, Colton's voice came low, almost like an order. "She'll be what you need." That night, Clara sat alone in the small room given to her. The walls were sturdy, the bed soft compared to the ground she'd known. Yet sleep didn't come. Why had he chosen her, a beggar in rags, for something so immense? What kind of man made such a demand without explanation? And why did his eyes, cold and unyielding, carry a flicker of something like grief? The days that followed painted the mystery deeper. Clara worked with quiet diligence, cooking meals, mending clothes, and sitting with the girls at lessons. They clung to her with surprising speed, as though starved for a mother's touch. And though she tried to keep her distance, their innocence melted pieces of her guarded heart. But Colton remained a storm she couldn't read. At times, he was gone before sunrise, returning long after dusk, dust on his boots and shadows in his expression. When their eyes met, she felt him measuring her, weighing something in silence. One evening, after putting the girls to bed, Clara found him on the porch, staring across the dark plains. She gathered her courage. "Why me? You could have chosen any woman in Red Rock. Why ask me to be their mother?" His jaw clenched. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "Because the others want my land, my money. You wanted work. That's different." Her breath caught at the rawness in his voice. Colton turned then, his gray eyes locking on hers. "Their mother's been gone near 2 years. I buried her right there, by the cottonwoods. Since then, no woman I brought here cared for my girls, only for what this place could give them. I won't let snakes slither near my daughters." Clara swallowed hard. "And you think I'm different?" He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I know you're desperate. Desperation doesn't lie." His words cut like a blade, and yet, there was truth in them. She had begged for work, not wealth. She had asked for survival, not luxury. That night, Clara wept quietly, torn between gratitude and fear. For the first time in years, she had food, shelter, and the embrace of children who looked at her with love. But she also knew one wrong step could send her back to the dust. 1 week later, the danger of Colton's world revealed itself. Bandits rode in from the hills, looking for cattle, money, and blood. Shots cracked in the night, and Clara woke to the girls screaming. She threw herself over them, shielding their bodies as glass shattered from a bullet through the window. Moments later, Colton burst into the room, rifle in hand, his face grim and hard. "Keep them safe," he ordered, then vanished into the storm of violence outside. The gunfire raged. Clara held the girls, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken in years. When the shooting finally stilled, silence pressed in heavy. She rushed to the porch, fear clawing her throat. Colton stood, chest heaving, blood staining his sleeve but his enemies lying scattered in the dust. His eyes, when they met hers, were no longer unreadable. They burned with something fierce, relief. From that night on, Clara understood. The question he had asked in town was never about convenience. It was about trust, about putting his daughter's lives into the hands of someone who wouldn't betray them when the guns came calling. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Clara's rags were replaced with dresses, her hollow face filled with color again. She'd taught the girls songs she remembered from her childhood, tended the garden, and stitched hope into the corners of their lives. Yet beneath it all, the haunting question remained, was she truly their mother now, or just a placeholder in Colton's guarded heart? One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Colton sat across from her at the table. The girls had gone to bed, and the silence stretched like a rope between them. "You've given them something I thought they'd never have again," he said quietly. Laughter, safety, love. Her chest tightened. "And you, Colton, what do you see me as?" He leaned forward, his eyes never wavering. "Not rags, not a beggar. You're the woman who stood when you should have fallen. The mother my girls needed. And maybe," he paused, the air thick with words unsaid. "Maybe more than that." Her heart pounded, and for the first time since she arrived, she allowed herself to believe she had not just stumbled into a ranch, but into a life she was meant to claim. Still, the West was unforgiving. Shadows lurked, storms brewed, and the past had a way of clawing back. But for Clara, for the man who had seen her desperation as truth, and for the girls who had chosen her before she chose herself, the future was no longer just survival. It was hope carved into the dust of Red Rock, and it was stronger than any gunshot echoing through the night.